Hey, everybody, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and Ches is joining me once again. And once again, we're doing a review, but it's not a review of an album. Ches, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Tim. Thanks for having me on again. Always a pleasure to be on your show, and looking forward to this episode, like all of them.
Yeah, this is a book that's been out for a little while now. We're both a little late getting to it, but better late than ever, and it's definitely worth talking about. One of my favorite guitar players, vocalists, and one of my favorite Canadian bands ever, uh, Rik Emmett. Lay It on the Line. It's subtitled "A Backstage Pass to Rockstar: Adventure, Conflict, and of course Triumph." Um, this came out at ECW. I've got a lot of books through ECW Publishing, and this book is the setup of it is a little bit different than it's not your typical autobiography. It's kind of laid out in segments. How would you best describe the format of this book, Jez?
Yeah, it's not like a lot of these biographies where it's all these tell-all stories from the road, backstage drama and stuff like that, which we all enjoy. We all enjoy reading that about our bands. It's not like that at all, and it's not laid out like that. A couple of the chapters, Rik is like giving advice about being into the music business. So I thought that was different. He gives a lot of his viewpoints on family and life and work and like getting older type thing, which is very different. And there is, he talks about, laid out about different aspects of the music business, and he does have the triumph part in there, but also he had an extensive solo career, as we all know, and he goes into that. So yeah, definitely laid out different. Not your typical, just like those tell all, you know, stories that kind of spill all the dirt type thing. Very interesting, very maturely written is what I was coming to mind when I read it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised by this because, growing up in Canada, watching much music and stuff, I've seen a lot of interviews with Rik, and he's always come off very well spoken, very intelligent,
Yeah.
and a very thoughtful guy. And you can kind of tell that in his lyrics too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but one thing I noticed about this book is that it's not laid out, it's not chronological.
No.
It kind of jumps all over the place in terms of topics, but it's not. You don't get lost reading it. It's
No.
almost. I mean, you could read it in you could read it in big chunks, but it's also you could knock out a chapter and say, "Oh, it was really interesting," and then, well, I wonder what else is going to happen. No, but he's finished that part of it. Now it's on to the next. I mean, you know, yeah. To Rik's, in Rik's point of view, Triumph was a very small window of time
Yeah.
compared to the rest of his career. But to people like me that grew up on their music, I want to know about that window of time because I mean,
Yes.
that's what and he's very open about the fact. Yeah, I know that's where people know are probably going to know me the best from is from my time in Triumph.
Yeah.
So he does indulge us in a little bit of that, and there were some there were some interesting insights I picked up from what he did talk about. I mean, I had a kind of an idea of what led to him leaving the band in 1988, which was very. It was a very they were estranged for many years. Like he was estranged from Gil and Mike,
Yeah.
and I didn't know how far back the seeds of his doubt in whether he wanted to keep doing that in the band. I didn't know how far back that went, but it actually
That
went back a lot farther. Like I thought it would have started around 86, but it was already kind of eating away at him.
that caught me, like that was one of the things I picked up on also. I, like everybody like yourself, I thought it was like that, that 86 around the last two albums type thing, like just looking, he wanted to do different things, right? He wanted to expand his creativity and do different things. But yeah, when you read the book, and especially that Triumph chapter, it goes back a little bit further, than
Yeah.
that. So that was a surprising revelation.
He talks a little bit about, well, he talks the fact that, he was hired, well, not hired on, but he was the last one to join. Gil and Mike were already, they were already playing together, and they took care of the business, and
Yeah.
they had their strengths there. And basically Rick's job was to come up with songs and, I guess kind of be the default front man, even though he didn't sing everything. And, but he talks about, I think as far back as 1984, when they signed with MCA,
Yeah.
how they had to make all this money back, and it was based on album sales that they'd never had. So he's like, how is this ever going to work?
Yeah.
uh
And I
it's
didn't,
interesting.
and I didn't know that part either. Like about they wanted to get out of that contract, and they had like that buyout, but then they needed to make up that money. And like you said, it was based on those albums. Like, they were a successful band, but they never, we have fans like us and everybody who love them, but they never had that multi-platinum success. And that's, like you said, that's what they needed to get out to make up that money. And was right around there at 84. And then there was that other time, there was another thing, like when the live album came out, there was some more money, and he said
Exactly.
that was rushed. And so it's kind of like it was starting there, and
Yeah,
but yeah, definitely, I was
that's
surprised
an
about that.
excellent point. Because I think growing up in the late 80s and watching much music, I mean, even after Rick had left, they played a ton of Triumph videos. There were always spotlights, and they rerun some of the concerts, and a lot of those early videos are live. And I
Yeah.
always had the impression that they were this huge band. And I remember being really surprised when I got one of Joel Whitburn's Billboard books, that at the time, so this would have been mid 90s when I got the last edition of that book, they only had 2 gold records in the States. It was Allied Forces and Never Surrender. And I remember thinking, wow, I just thought that they sold more records than that. I knew they weren't a multi platinum, but I just thought they would have had a string of platinum albums in the States. And then years later, the catalog was recertified when they got the masters back. And as it turns out, yeah, they did. So Just a Game is gold, Allied Forces platinum, Never Surrender gold, Thunder 7 gold, and the Classics album is gold. So it's like, okay, well, that seems a little bit more like, because a lot of big bands opened for Triumph. I mean, whether it was Dokken or, there were a lot of bands that opened for Triumph, and they're this well-known band. So that was a bit of an eye-opener. But you bring up a really good point with the live album, Stages from 85. And I never thought about it before, because technically Stages, that would have been their 8th, because Thunder 7 was called Thunder 7 because it's their 7th album.
Hmm.
Then there's that whole confusion over the first 2, and then the reissue of Rock and Roll Machine and all that. But most bands, if they were to sign a new record contract, don't put a live album out as the second album of that contract, but they were trying to recoup some of that money. And also, a lot of bands didn't put double live albums out in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so reading that, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, okay, I never thought about that before.
And when it came out, like I remember running to the store. Actually, I remember this so vividly. I had to call around to 3 A&A record stores, and finally I had found one that still had a cassette copy of it. Said, "Okay, hold it for me." I remember taking the bus, and I loved it, of course, because it's Triumph. But then, yeah, like going back and now reading that, it's just like, oh yeah,
It's
okay,
like,
that
why
is
would they put a
that
live
was
album
second
at
one.
that particular
Yeah,
point, right?
yeah,
So yeah, it's that was eye-opening. I really found that eye-opening. But all of the stuff that Rick writes about is interesting, about songwriting royalties. And he just, like I said, he's an intelligent guy. And he, there's no dirt slinging. Like, that's the whole thing with Triumph. It was never, I never got the feeling that it was ever personal. It was always business. And it was such a shame that you could tell, like, when you'd see interviews with him over the years, that he regretted it. He regretted the way it ended. And there was a little bit of backbiting, but I mean, we're Canadian, so we're so polite, right? There's not a lot of, it wasn't a Motley Crue,
no,
type of,
yeah,
he does, he's very candid about very personal things. Like, I would never have known. I knew he had kids, but I would never have known that his wife. This is the strangest thing. I'm just trying to put myself in his shoes. Like his wife loses a baby, and then she has twins. Like,
Yeah.
well, we lost a baby, and then she's smiling. He's like, "What are you smiling for?" And it's
Yeah.
like he's like, "How many people go through that range of emotions all at once?" And it's like, not many.
Yeah. No, no,
um,
yeah.
but sometimes you read these books. It doesn't happen often, but every once in a while you'll read them and you come out of it going, Ugh. I'd be just as soon as well not knowing this or that. I didn't read anything in here that did that. Everything was
Yeah.
very above board and just kind of regular stuff. And Rik strikes me as the type of guy that for the most part kept himself, kept his nose clean out there on the road and didn't really
Yeah.
indulge in it. He really just wanted to play music. And
And he mentions
uh,
that he said he I really love how he said he goes like I was a singer, I sang, I shared the lead vocals, I was lead guitar player, I needed to be my best every night. So he says like after a gig he didn't go out to the parties, he would go back to the hotel, rest, read, write music, that type of thing. um and what I like, he goes into like detail about what brought on the reconciliation
yeah,
with the band. And that, I think I didn't really hear, like I was just so happy that they were back, and I just pulled it out. They had that Hall of Fame, and then we had this, they had those two special
yes,
shows.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I was
yeah,
just as a fan, again, just like that live album in the 80s, like I ran when I heard this was coming out. But he talks about that reconciliation, and what brought that on, and how it was, it was, he was back with, he had like that brotherhood again with Mike and Gil. And then of course led to the documentary, and then all that. And then it was great to hear that insight of what brought the back. And I think for us as fans, it's just like, yeah, it is so good that they had that reconciliation. And I never thought we'd see another Triumph release, and there we had that. And then of course it led to the documentary, and so he goes into insight of that and how important that was. And it was great to hear that. So I had, you didn't hear how it came about. You just said, oh, they were up for that Hall of Fame. And but then here's what kind of led to that.
I knew a little bit about that, but I didn't know. It goes to a lot more. It goes into a lot more detail about it than I'd ever read. So, um, there's a lot in here about his musical influences, and his musical influences are kind of all over the place, whether it's jazz players or blues players, or obviously there was a lot of progressive, and because I got to try for one of the first hard rock bands I ever got into, and so I got into bands that were older much
Yeah.
later, and then when I started getting into Yes, and I started listening to some of Steve Howe stuff, and I'm like, I'll bet you he was an influence on Rik Emmett, because I hear a lot of that. And then like the Rock and Roll Machine, that guitar solo where it's got the echoes going on.
Yeah.
I remember when I got into Queen, I'm like, oh, okay, that must be where he got that from Brian May. And
Yeah. And
so
he talks about that in the book. He breaks down like that guitar solo from Rock and
yeah,
Roll Machine, and he talks about how Yes was an influence in there. So yeah, definitely, for sure. And again, like I think us as Triumph fans, like we want like more about Triumph, but he does have that Triumph chapter. And I think it's just like he said, like you said at the beginning, like that was like that part of his life, his life. He taught music at Humber College for so many years. He was
yeah,
on staff there, and I had heard that, but I kind of forgot about that. So there was that, and he was there for quite a while. And again, he just, on that solo career, he went off into so many different styles, and that's what he wanted to
yeah.
do, because on a lot of those Triumph albums, there was those classical guitar,
Always, yeah,
interludes, and that was
always,
him. And he talks about on Thunder 7 how he was grateful that he had like those songs on there. He call it, he uses the term evergreen songs, so those popular songs that are on the radio. but then he calls them like B songs. Like, he had about four of those, like on Thunder 7, how he was grateful, like to Mike and Gil, how, to have those on there included. And I always enjoyed those. And I always kind of
Oh yeah.
remember like there's kind of like more to that, because you had those hard rocking Triumph songs and you got these classical guitar interludes on that. And it just meshed so well, and said, yeah, that he can do, there's a lot more to him. He could do that. And so it's not surprising when he went to his solo career, like he went off to so many different styles. So I
Yeah.
liked how we talked about that.
I like the fact that, I mean, yeah, because thanks to him, I was exposed to that style of guitar playing, and I didn't realize it when I'd hear those, like Midsummer's Daydream and Fantasy Serenade and all of those different
Yeah.
those little acoustic pieces, which I always just loved.
Yeah.
And that was, and I knew that that was a little bit different. Not every hard rock band did that. Most of them, they did, here's our 9-10 song album,
Yeah.
just songs. But Rik would break them up with these little acoustic interludes, and they were always great and they were always memorable.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah.
It was interesting. I read a little bit about the whole Sport of Kings. Ron Nevison was tapped to produce, but that didn't work out. And then arguing about over who was going to sing which songs,
Yeah.
and you know that is kind of something that I think needs to be brought up, because I always liked the dichotomy of how you had those two different voices, how you had Rik with the really high voice and then Gil with that. I
Yeah.
liked both of their voices pretty much equally. It's all Triumph to me, right?
Yeah.
And
Same
that's
here.
why, like, I was a true believer, man. When they came out with that Edge of Excess album, I remember thinking, all right, Triumph's back, and I like Gil's voice, but 10 songs with Gil singing, it's like, yeah, but I miss the difference. I miss that difference with Rik taking a vocal here and there.
That I had the
Just
same
wasn't the
thought.
same.
Yeah, I had the same thought when that album came out. I said, okay, yeah, Gil singing. I like Gil. It's Triumph. I like the singles they put out. But the same thing, like when I listen to that album, and I go back to it quite often because I enjoy it. I'm a fan of the band. I miss Rik on that album. Yeah, I totally
Yeah.
agree with you on that, because they just meshed so well. It was all Triumph. It was two lead singers, and yeah, that definitely, that's what was missing there. Yeah.
And there's things I learned that I didn't know, without giving spoilers away, about bands that he was offered gigs
Yeah.
with. Like, I knew one. I didn't know about, there's about three mentioned in here.
Those
And
three, those three, I had no idea. Those, when I read the three offers he had, and relatively, it sounds like they came around the same time or
yeah,
within a year or so. I know I did not hear that back in the day, and I was like, wow. And what would that have been like?
well, like all around the same time, you had bands who were either getting back together or they weren't going to be getting together with the full original band. They needed a singer, and not only that, but they needed a singer who could play guitar. And I found that very, very fascinating. Like I said, no spoilers, but here's a hint
Yeah,
to one of them.
yeah,
I don't know
for
how
sure.
that, I can't picture how that would have ever worked,
Yeah,
personality wise.
I read it and I just like, wow, I did not know that. And all,
Yeah.
all the bands he mentions about the offers, I said, wow, I said, did not know that. Yeah, how would have been like? Yeah,
But the problem is, I think, is that he's too identifiable as the voice of Triumph.
yeah,
And it would just sound like Rik Emmett singing songs.
yeah,
Um, and to his credit, uh, you know, those would have been big money offers. He could have gone on the road, and
yeah,
whether any new
yeah,
music was made, he could have pocketed some, and he didn't. So I think this is a guy that was just purely in it for the music. And
yeah,
yeah, like, he doesn't throw rocks at people. He's not, there's no ill will here. And maybe one day Gil or Mike, or maybe there'll be an authorized Triumph autobiography. The thing is, you're only getting one perspective. But when it's a trio, you're getting a lot of perspective, and he was like the most visible guy in the band. My only regret is I never got to see Triumph in concert, because they were done before I ever started going to see
yeah,
shows. But the documentary was good. That kind of it did feel like it was cathartic for Rik as well. And I think the other guys were always like, he can come back anytime, but business and money and all that stuff, it does funny things to people. But
Yeah.
so yes, if you're a Rik Emmett fan, if you're a Triumph fan, I would highly recommend Lay It on the Line, because it's a solid read. It's a good read. It's a read you want to come back to, and you feel good reading it. It's not one where you just read like one disaster after another, just sleazy details and just unsavory things about people. No, there's none of that in here. This is a positive read. It's some of it you could double as a self-help manual, but and if you aspire to songwriting or playing an instrument, there's a lot of encouragement here too. So highly recommend it.
Definitely. Same here. Yeah.
And I've been listening to a lot of Triumph since then. No big surprise there. It's just because he does mention certain songs. I'm like, oh yeah, that part. So
when he talks about how he really liked the sound of the Allied forces, and one of my favorite albums. And he said he really likes how that came out. And of course, the big songs off there, he talks about that. Not surprisingly, like when I was done it, that was the first album I put on right there. And lots of Triumph since then, and his solo career too. I really enjoyed his solo career. It's like when he went solo, and I just dug this out just saying, like, when this came out, I said yes. I was so sad that he wasn't in Triumph anymore. Again, ran to get this when it came out, and I think that's a really good album. But yeah, I've been listening to lots of it, and that's, I think, what these things do. Like, they get you in that mood, and then he'll talk about something, or you read something in a book, and it just say, oh yeah, I never thought of it, and then you go back to listen to that song. Oh yeah, this is what he's talking. It's like hearing the songs fresh for a new time, even though we've heard them a million times and love them.
Yeah.
To hear that perspective. Yeah.
A good read, definitely a good read. Go pick up Rik Emmett, Lay It on the Line. And Ches, thank you for sitting in again. It was great to bounce the ideas off of, and we'll be doing this again, I'm sure. So everybody, thank you so much for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. We'll see you all later.